Steve Harvey expected an easy win and walked into a trap. What happens when one of America's most recognizable TV hosts sits down for what should be a friendly daytime chat, and it turns into the most uncomfortable interview of his career? Steve Harvey thought he was stepping onto The View for a smooth conversation, a few laughs, and a quick book plug. But what happened next lit the studio up and split viewers straight down the middle. Before we dive into the video, please like, subscribe, and comment. Now let's get back to the video. It was a Tuesday morning, and Steve walked onto the View set, wearing that familiar confidence suit crisp, smile locked in, the kind that usually disarms any room instantly. The audience welcomed him with warm applause as he slid into the guest chair, nodding politely like he'd done 1,000 times before. And for a moment, it looked like just another polished TV appearance. Whoopi Goldberg greeted him first, upbeat and professional, while Sarah Haynes and Sunny Hostin smiled along, ready to keep things light and friendly. But Joy Behar sat at the far end of the table with her arms folded, face tight, eyes fixed on Steve like she'd already decided how this was going to go. "Steve Harvey, everybody!" Whoopi announced, and the clapping rose again as Steve gave that trademark grin and said, "Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to be with you, ladies." Sarah eased in with the obvious setup, asking about Steve's new relationship book and what inspired him to write another guide for couples, the kind of question meant to keep things calm and promotional. Steve leaned forward, relaxed and confident, saying that after decades of hosting Family Feud and listening to real families, he learned one thing the hard way: communication is everything. And when people stop listening, the cracks start spreading fast. Sunny jumped in warmly, praising the reviews and the response, and for a second the whole table looked like it was going to stay on track. Then Steve noticed it again. Joy's expression didn't soften even once. Trying to keep it playful, Steve glanced down the table and teased, "Joy, you look like you've got something to say," letting out a light chuckle like he could joke the tension away. Joy didn't laugh. Her eyes narrowed and she went straight for the throat, saying, "Well, Steve, I've been reading your book and I have to ask, don't you think it's a bit hypocritical for someone who's been married 3 times to be giving relationship advice?" The room changed instantly. The studio went quiet. The other hosts looked away like they didn't want to be caught in the blast zone, and Steve's smile slipped for half a second before he forced it back into place. Steve answered carefully, trying not to let the moment turn ugly, saying, "Joy, I think my experiences, the good and the hard parts, actually give me insight into what works and what doesn't. Every relationship teaches you something." But Joy wasn't there to hear a thoughtful answer. She pushed harder, asking how anyone should trust advice from a man whose first 2 marriages ended in divorce. And the way she said it wasn't curiosity, it was a challenge. Whoopi tried to step in and soften it. "Joy, I think what Steve is saying is..." But Joy cut her off fast with, "No, Whoopi, let him answer," making it clear she wasn't sharing the floor with anyone. Steve's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady and said he's been happily married to Marjorie for over 15 years. They've built a blended family, and yes, he learned from his mistakes, because that's what growth looks like. Joy scoffed like she'd been waiting for that line, snapping back, "Growth, or just good marketing?" And the audience started murmuring, because now it didn't feel like an interview. It felt like a public trial. Sarah looked visibly uncomfortable. Sunny shifted like she was ready to intervene. And yet Joy kept going like the tension was the entire point. She dragged up Steve's old comedy material, saying some of it feels dated now, and questioning whether his advice was just another version of the same old thinking. That's when Steve set his coffee down harder than he meant to, the sound sharp in the silence, and he finally said what everyone could feel. He came to talk about helping people build stronger relationships, not to be attacked over jokes from decades ago. Joy fired back instantly, saying she wasn't attacking. She was questioning credibility, and that from her seat, it looked like he was profiting off advice in an area he struggled with himself. You could feel the temperature rising in the studio. Whoopi tried to redirect again toward the book's positive feedback, but Steve didn't let it slide this time, turning his head toward Joy and saying, "No, Joy wants this conversation, so let's have it." And his voice had a new edge that wasn't there before. Then Steve looked straight at her and asked the question that changed the energy completely. "You're sitting here, trying to tear me down in front of millions. For what? What's your agenda here?" Joy leaned back with a satisfied smirk and said, "My agenda is truth, Steve. Our viewers deserve to know who they're taking advice from." And then she added the little twist meant to sting. "And your defensive reaction is pretty telling." Steve's voice rose just enough to make heads turn, and he shot back, "Defensive? You're coming at my character, my marriage, my career, and you want me to sit here smiling like it's nothing." Joy, dripping with sarcasm, waved a hand like she was dismissing him and said, "This is what happens when you ask legitimate questions." He falls apart, like she was narrating his breakdown as entertainment. That's when Steve pushed his chair back and stood up abruptly, the scrape loud, the move bold, and the audience froze because now it wasn't tense, it was unstable. "I'm not falling apart," Steve said, voice firm. "I'm calling out your unprofessional behavior. This isn't journalism, but this is character assassination," Joy snapped. "Sit down, Steve. You're embarrassing yourself," like she was still in control of the room. Steve let out a short, bitter laugh and said, "You think I'm embarrassing myself? You've spent the last 10 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television, and you think I'm the problem?" And right there, right in that moment, everyone watching could tell this wasn't going back to normal. Joy's face tightened, and for the first time, the confidence she'd carried into the exchange started to wobble just a little. "You're being dramatic," she snapped, waving her hand dismissively. "This is how real interviews work. Steve, we don't just toss out soft questions so you can promote your book." Steve didn't sit back down. Instead, he pointed toward her, his voice steady but louder now, and said he's done thousands of interviews across every major network, and he knows the difference between tough questions and personal attacks. "What you're doing right now is the second one," he said, and the words hit the room like a dropped plate. Whoopi finally tried again to regain control, suggesting they take a commercial break before things went further. But Steve shook his head slowly and said, "No. No. Joy started this, and we're going to finish it right here," he said firmly, eyes locked on her, refusing to let the moment get swept away. Joy crossed her arms and leaned back in her chair, chin lifted, daring him to continue, and said, "Fine, let's finish it." Then she doubled down, accusing Steve of building his entire career on stereotypes and now trying to rebrand himself as a relationship expert, calling the whole thing hypocritical. Steve's hands clenched at his sides as he fired back that this level of hostility wasn't normal, and asked point blank if she had a personal issue with him, because this didn't feel professional anymore. Joy snapped back immediately, telling him not to flatter himself, insisting it wasn't personal, and claiming it was about accountability. That word set Steve off even more. "My past?" he said, his voice cracking with disbelief. "My past includes being homeless, sleeping in my car, building something from nothing, employing hundreds of people and giving millions back to others, but you want to boil my entire life down to jokes from 30 years ago." Joy waved it away, calling it a sob story, and the audience audibly reacted, some gasping at how cold it sounded. Sarah tried to speak up, her voice shaky, but Joy shut her down instantly, telling her to stay out of it, making it clear she wasn't done. Steve stepped closer to the table now, his presence filling the space, and said he was tired of people tearing down decades of growth just because they didn't like his past. Joy's eyebrows shot up as she asked, "People like me?" her voice sharp with accusation. And that's when Steve dropped the line that made the entire studio gasp. People who are so unhappy, they need to tear others down to feel important, he said bluntly, accusing her of using humiliation as entertainment. The audience reacted instantly, the sound sharp and collective, and Joy's face flushed red with anger. "How dare you!" she shouted, saying he knew nothing about her life. Steve shot back that happy people don't ambush guests, secure people don't turn interviews into circus acts, and real professionals don't let personal feelings hijack the show. Joy slammed her hand on the table, accusing Steve of acting like a child throwing a tantrum. But Steve roared back that he was standing because he refused to be disrespected anymore. Whoopi begged everyone to slow down and breathe, but Steve turned to her and said he appreciated her, yet he needed to say this out loud. He accused Joy of planning the ambush from the moment he walked in, saying this was never about honest questions, but about tearing him down on live television. Joy denied it, calling him paranoid and insisting she simply challenged his credibility. But Steve laughed bitterly and asked what her credibility was. "What families have you helped? What lives have you improved?" he demanded, saying all she does is sit behind a desk, tearing people apart for applause. "I'm a journalist," Joy shouted, her voice cracking. That's when Steve exploded, telling her she's not a journalist, she's a talk show host with an attitude, and real journalists challenge people with respect, not hostility. The studio was pure chaos now, audience members whispering, "Phones coming." Out, co-hosts frozen in shock as the argument spiraled. Joy stood up to face him across the table and dropped the accusation she clearly thought would end it all, saying his real problem was that he couldn't handle being challenged by a woman. Steve's eyes widened, stunned, and he fired back instantly that the strongest people in his life are women, his wife, his daughters, his mother, and this had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with disrespect. Joy's voice climbed higher as she insisted she was just asking hard questions, but Steve shot back that she wasn't asking questions at all and she was making accusations. Sonny finally spoke up, trying to calm both sides, but both Steve and Joy shouted, "Don't tell me to calm down," at the exact same time, then locked eyes in silence. Steve ran his hands through his hair and muttered that he came to talk about helping couples communicate, not to be attacked by someone who clearly never learned how to have a respectful conversation. Joy pointed at him and said he was the one being disrespectful, that he started yelling, that he made it personal. Steve stared at her in disbelief and said she started the interview by questioning his character and asked how that could possibly be anything but personal. Joy snapped back that it was relevant to what he was selling, and if he was giving relationship advice, people had a right to dig into his history. Steve threw his hands up and said, "Fine, but do it professionally, not by calling someone a hypocrite 5 minutes into an interview." That's when Joy said the line that sucked the air out of the room. "I don't owe you respect," she snapped. "You earn respect." The studio went dead silent. Even Joy seemed to realize what she just said, but Steve stared at her, breathing hard, and then spoke quietly in a way that somehow felt more powerful than all the shouting. "You just told me on national television that you don't owe me basic human respect," he said slowly. "And you're wondering why I'm upset." Joy tried to walk it back, saying she meant professional respect, but Steve shook his head and said that's not what she said, and everyone heard it. Then he turned toward the camera, breaking the fourth wall completely, and told viewers at home exactly what Joy had just admitted. And that's where the tension stopped being loud and started becoming dangerous. Steve held his gaze on the camera for a long second, letting the weight of the moment sink in, and then slowly turned back toward Joy, his expression calm, but hardened in a way that felt final. "You know what's dramatic, Joy?" he said evenly. "Ambushing a guest on your own show, dragging someone's personal life into the spotlight just to discredit their work. Sitting behind that desk like you get to decide who deserves basic human decency." Joy's hands were shaking now, her voice losing some of its sharp edge as she snapped back that this was her job and that she was holding him accountable. Steve let out a cold laugh and said he'd been in this business for over 30 years, and he knows exactly what professional interviews look like, and this wasn't one of them. Whoopi made one last attempt to reset the situation, gently suggesting they start over, but Steve raised his hand and stopped her mid-sentence. He said he respected Whoopi, Sarah, and Sunny, calling them professionals, but made it clear he would not sit there and be disrespected by someone who thinks tearing people down makes good television. Joy shot to her feet again, face flushed, shouting that nobody was tearing him down and accusing him of being overly sensitive. Steve snapped back instantly, asking if she was even listening to herself, pointing out that she'd spent nearly half an hour attacking his marriages, his past, his career, and his character. Joy screamed that she asked legitimate questions, but Steve cut her off, laying it out plainly so even the audience could follow it. He explained the difference between a real question and an accusation, saying, "A real question invites conversation, while what she did was designed to embarrass." For the first time, Joy hesitated, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to interrupt but couldn't find the words. Steve didn't let the silence go to waste. He continued, saying, "Accountability doesn't mean punishing someone for growing, learning, or surviving a past that wasn't perfect, and that everyone watching had a past they wouldn't want, dragged out on live television." The audience sat frozen, hanging on every word, and even the crew behind the cameras looked locked in place. Steve turned toward the other co-hosts and apologized to them and to the viewers, saying he came in good faith to talk about helping people build better relationships and never expected to be ambushed like this. Joy shouted that he didn't need to apologize for her, but Steve snapped back that he wasn't apologizing for her. He was apologizing to everyone else who had to witness her behavior. Then Steve said something that visibly rattled her. He told her real accountability looks like admitting when you're wrong, treating people with respect even when you disagree, and asking tough questions without turning them into personal attacks. Joy shrieked that she didn't need lessons from him on how to do her job, and Steve fired back that clearly she did, because what happened that day wasn't journalism, wasn't entertainment, and wasn't professional. "How dare you!" Joy screamed. Steve shot back calmly, asking how dare he defend himself, how dare he call out bullying, and how dare he refuse to sit quietly while someone tried to humiliate him. Joy accused him of trying to make her look bad, and Steve stared at her in disbelief before delivering the line that made the audience collectively inhale. "I don't have to make you look bad," he said. "You're doing that all by yourself." He told her every word, every insult, every outburst was revealing exactly who she was to millions of people watching at home. Joy screamed that she knew who she was, but Steve asked quietly if she really did, because from where he stood, she looked like someone who confused cruelty with strength. Her eyes filled with angry tears as she insisted she wasn't cruel. "Then prove it," Steve said calmly. "Apologize." The room went completely silent, every eye locked on Joy as the moment stretched on. For a brief second, it looked like she might actually do it, like she might back down. Instead, she crossed her arms and said flatly, "I have nothing to apologize for." Steve nodded slowly, as if the last piece of the puzzle had finally clicked into place. "And there it is," he said, his voice steady. "A person who believes basic human respect is optional, that being right matters more than being decent." Joy screamed at him to get out, her voice cracking with rage. Steve smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but calmly, and said, "Gladly." As he turned to leave, he stopped one last time and told her she'd spent the entire interview trying to tear him down, but all she'd done was show the world exactly who she was. Joy shouted that she didn't want his pity, but Steve turned back and said quietly that it wasn't pity. It was compassion. He said anyone who needs to hurt others to feel powerful is someone who's hurting inside, and he genuinely hoped she found peace. With that, Steve Harvey walked off the set, leaving behind stunned co-hosts, a silent audience, and Joy Behar standing alone at the table, trembling with rage and humiliation. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the aftermath as the silence grew heavier by the second, and it became painfully clear this wasn't just another heated interview gone wrong. It was a public unraveling that exposed something far uglier than disagreement. Joy stood there, chest heaving, realizing too late that in trying to destroy her guest, she may have permanently damaged her own image instead. And that's the moment viewers would argue about long after the episode ended. Not about who won the argument, but about whether respect still exists in daytime television at all.